Hey everyone, you ready to get your vibe on? You're watching TechStrong Gang. Hi everyone, happy Wednesday. It's Alan Schimmel for TechStrong Gang. Welcome to join us right here on Hump Day. Kind of hard to believe Wednesday. I blinked, it was Monday. We've got a great show today. We got some interesting things going on. Not all AI, but some AI. We've got some really interesting people to talk about them with. They're all regulars here on the gang. Let me quickly introduce you to them. We have Mitch Ashley, Chris Blask, Kate Scarcella, Dan O'Brien, and of course the Dean Mike Vizard coming at you from Lake Placid. I don't know if he's going off the ski jump like Eddie the Eagle or what, but whatever. Welcome, gang members. Thanks for being here. You know, we're going to start off today. We're going to come back to the vibe, but we're going to start off with ARM. Mike, you know, to me, ARM is one of the untold great success stories in tech over the last 10 years. Why don't you start us off there?
Yeah, their CEO came out and just kind of made a comment to the fact that they now have 70,000 customers for our ARM chips. And we all talk about GPUs all day long, but most of the workloads I know are running on traditional CPUs still. And we talk about Intel and AMD, but looks to me, you know, I think it was last year when AWS told me, I think half of their new workloads are running on their ARM-based chips. So Dan, is ARM kind of like rapidly emerging as, I don't know, the number 2, 3 player in chips, or why don't we talk more about ARM?
Yeah, listen, I think the ARM story has been incredible. You know, if I had to pinpoint why we don't talk about ARM, it's because generally I think we're talking about their customers. I mean, they are really the key enabler of a lot of silicon innovation in the industry over the past decade or so. You know, it comes from really more of an embedded background, really the primary player in mobile, enabled by their customers like Apple, Qualcomm, MediaTek, Samsung, Huawei. But more recently, you know, really making a significant move in the data center space. And that's really where the action is, as we know. AI silicon is all the rage. And, you know, pretty much every competitor that we talk about to NVIDIA is really being enabled by ARM. I mean, you know, Intel and AMD would be kind of the exceptions there. And I think we all know kind of Intel's woes. AMD getting more competitive. I think their rack scale solution coming next year will, you know, continue to give them some momentum on the GPU side. But really, all of these AI ASICs are really driven by ARM. When we think about, you know, Google's TPU, ARM IP, you know, with some Broadcom design help behind it. Everything Marvell is doing, really everything the hyperscalers are doing through vertical integration enabled by ARM. You see, you know, Graviton and, you know, Inferentia and Trainium at AWS. You see the Maya silicon that Microsoft's working on. You know, really ARM is the enabler of that alternative to NVIDIA ecosystem. And, you know, a lot of it coming from really their history as somebody who's been able to really drive a lot of performance at a lot lower power, you know, envelope. Obviously, power consumption is becoming a really key bottleneck in AI. But, you know, they've also invested a lot on the software side. I think we continue to see that, you know, software is the great enabler of hardware. You know, in order for a new chip architecture to latch, you really need to invest heavily on the software side. And I think ARM's done that. So definitely a hot name, somebody we should probably be talking more about. And again, you know, to the degree we talk about them less, it's because they really give a lot of the shine to their customers.
It's almost not as much customers as truly channel partners, right? Because I think that's the key to ARM, their distribution. How many times have we sat on here and said, who's going to compete with NVIDIA? My God, this is a runaway train. No one can compete with NVIDIA. And I'm not saying anyone can at a $4 trillion valuation. But when you look at ARM's distribution, and that's, Dan, to your point, you just nailed it. It's we don't hear about ARM. It's because most of their channel partners, their go-to-market partners, are companies we're hearing about. Now, adding them all up, I still don't know if they come close to NVIDIA's, market share or penetration there. But remember, NVIDIA is pretty much, I mean, it was a gaming chip now, of course, but the real bread and butter here is the AI chip. I think ARM has a much broader footprint of technology, in terms of chips. It's not, you mentioned it's the mobile chip. It's now the data center chip. It's the laptop chip, right? It's an enviable
Yeah,
powerhouse.
significant inroads with PCs, right, enabled by Apple and Qualcomm, where they've taken some share. And starting to get into the market themselves. I mean, I think we see, ARM launching its own chip sometime later this year. It's been widely reported Meta is a kind of key customer for them on that side. But really much more playing on the CPU side, than the GPU side at this point in time in the data center. But, companies come out and said targeting 50% share of data center by the end of this year. So, clearly making some significant inroads. And I think a lot of that has been enabled by the, internal silicon efforts of the hyperscalers. The past several years, I think notably Google and AWS quite far ahead on that front in terms of using ARM.
Yeah, ARM's kind of one of those 20-year overnight successes, right? They've been at this for a long time. But to your point, Dan, we talk about them when we talk about Qualcomm and Apple M chips and all of the different the licensing that they've done with their architecture, which has been frankly a brilliant strategy. It's the alternative to Intel, where here's the architecture, you can build your own chips using that, licensing that technology. And you mentioned this too, and I want to emphasize it because I noticed about 3-4 years ago when you were talking to ARM people, they were emphasizing how do we get compatibility for ARM into open source projects? How do we get compatibility for ARM into data centers? How do we get compatibility? So they've made a real effort to kind of go at the low end of let's get into the infrastructure, let's get into the software stack to make sure we're already there so people can compile and run on ARM just as well as they can, in Intel or in some cases NVIDIA.
So, Mitch, we've talked about the concept of application modernization on this show, and it's always usually in the context of mainframes to something that's x86. And as I scratch my head and I think about all this, I'm like, am I going to see app modernization where we're going to take legacy workloads and move them from x86 to ARM because there are benefits to be had? And how hard or how big a lift might that be?
Absolutely. And that goes to the whole, underlying software substrate. If your open source stack that you're using, all the different element of projects, for example, or support ARM already, you can recompile your applications. Maybe you do some design to optimize for mobile kind of apps if that's what you're doing. But it's a much smaller lift to do that today. By the way, we talk about modernization of mainframe applications. Well, how old is Netflix's infrastructure, right? That's been built over many, many years. There's a lot of legacy stuff they have. We think of Netflix and AWS and Lyft and different companies that we work with today as new and innovative, but they've had software stacks that have been present and built up over many years. So everybody has got this modernization challenge to some degree where they need to keep up their software infrastructure and their stack moving forward.
Well, and this is all happening in a macro environment where, to be clear, none of us have any idea where the hell AI is going, right? And suddenly in the last couple of years, we've all gone, oh, graphics processors are really good at vector math, which is what we need to run the LLM holographic spaces and so forth. And it goes through the roof. At the same time, the use of those chipsets and that technology and that whole stack is using more power than, God's own little bunnies to make popcorn, right? And it's becoming more evident that there's other ways to do it. There are tasks that inference engines are fantastic for, but asking them to add 42 plus 3 is not really one of them. And so at the chip level, everyone is focusing on GPUs. But at the architecture level, and I have no idea whether this is part of it, but this is the way I think about it, we've all forgotten other chips exist. Other processors do things. Way better things quite often, as long as you're not trying to, fold a molecule.
And with a lower energy consumption, which is, as we go forward, as a person who has dealt extensively with energy, I can tell you that I have seen them the ARM architecture through IoT devices and IIoT devices, and that footprint is massive. So I think ARM for the win.
Well, the trend in the market's towards heterogeneous compute, right? Really design silicon for for the specific workloads. That's been kind of the mega trend over the last several years. That more workloads that are finding the way to silicon that's kind of purpose built, and ARM's really been the great enabler of that, right? So I think that trend continues, and to Chris's point, on a lot of the stuff we're playing with in AI, we may have a fundamentally wrong architecture for where it's going to land in the long term, and ARM seems really well positioned to benefit from some of that rationalization and that balancing of, kind of price performance that needs to happen across the market.
They've got the licensing model down for sure, Dan.
Well, and Dan, I love where that goes as well, because that takes it sort of a step further than what I was thinking. But yeah, I'll say it. We think that 90 to 99% power reduction to achieve the same task can be done, right? It's just because you look case by case, it's sort of ridiculous. But as you take a step further, because of the adaptability that we have these days with these sort of tools and structures, not just GPUs or x86 or why not? You remember EPROMs and programmable chips and so forth? It was really big back in the day, and customized hardware for workloads. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. So if they're down that track, I'm with them.
Let me come back to the best kept secret in tech kind of theme on ARM here. If we weren't in this NVIDIA irrational exuberance, if I may call it that at some level, what a story ARM would be, because they would be competing with just AMD and Intel. And quite frankly, they're kicking butt. Well, AMD's a channel partner, right? At some level, but they'd be kicking butt. I mean, when you look at what Apple has done with their chips, with the Apple Silicon, compared to the Intel, based on this architecture, it really is. I mean, it's a phenomenal, phenomenal story. And they've been able to do it. Now, Dan, I know you used to cover ARM back in the day. I'm not going to say you're
when
old.
They were a public company before SoftBank bought them. Covered them as an equity. Yeah, and they're riding the NVIDIA train too, right? They're on the CPU side, and their CPUs are right alongside NVIDIA's GPUs. I mean, let's not forget NVIDIA did try to buy ARM, which maybe was the validation we all should have picked up on at the time as to their potential. Obviously, that didn't get through antitrust, but NVIDIA's Grace CPUs are all based on ARM architecture as well. So certainly they would be picking up more if NVIDIA weren't doing what they were doing, but they're benefiting from that trend as well.
Yeah, their Tegra chip is based on ARM. Several things.
Anybody besides me kind of have a perception that maybe these ARM chips are just fundamentally more secure than x86 chips? Is that a benefit of this as well?
I don't know. I was thinking, I met a person who was 5, 6, 7 years ago, and he just left Intel as there's, not the firmware, but the actual chip security person. He just got to the point he had to say, we can't tell anymore. Right. So maybe, security at the chip level can be, optimized. But again, we're levels of complexity. And I'm thinking out loud here, recursing these same tools back on them, maybe we can raise chip level security. But frankly, I never count on that sort of thing. It's beyond the ken. You need to secure everything at a layer you can see.
And the other thing, Mike, that sounds very much like the old, Apple's much more secure than Windows kind of argument, right? Look, when you have a certain amount of market share, you get that bullseye, right? And this might be an interesting thing to see how it plays out. ARM keeps making a lot of noise about how much market share they're getting. They become more of a target for the security people. I don't believe that any of these architectures are necessarily inherently more secure than others, right?
I think that's fair, Alec. But I also think, we can probably chart ARM's rise, alongside kind of Intel's, fall back to the pack, right? I mean, I think, the reality is we're probably in year 10 to 15 of a 3 to 4 decade transition away from x86 as the dominant architecture. ARM obviously was there on the embedded side, but really kind of took the momentum from Intel and mobile. We've chipped away at Intel a little bit on the PC side with what Apple and Qualcomm and the AI PC have done, and x86 was the dominant architecture and data center for kind of all of history up until probably the last 5 to 10 years, with really the momentum coming in the last 5 and seemingly going forward. So that's probably the bigger trend here is, we've kind of moved from an Intel world to an ARM world.
When they write the history books on this, Intel's miss on mobile in general is probably, I'm not going to say it's fatal, but it was fateful in terms of allowing a lot of people to come in and compete there. But look, hey,
I got $10 that says that there's going to be an AI agent for converting x86 workloads to ARM before the end of the year. So it might not be 2 decades, Dan.
If there isn't already.
Pretty compelling stories there on AWS with customers making that exact transition.
Hey, speaking of AWS, they're kind of groovy getting their vibe on. We're going to talk about that next. You're watching TechStrong, gang.
Discover TechStrong Group, the epicenter of tech innovation. We're your go-to for reaching IT leaders and practitioners worldwide. Our secret? Impactful content that sparks awareness, engagement, and top-quality leads. With us, you'll access editorial websites, streaming videos, virtual events, custom content, analyst research, and more. Join our satisfied clients. Let's revolutionize your tech journey. Contact us today and tell your story to the world in the most powerful way with TechStrong Group.
Hey folks, we're back, and as Alan said, AWS is previewing an IDE called Kiro, and it does a couple of things, but at its core, it's talking about vibe coding for the enterprise, and the 2 pieces of it are hooks that are essentially links to back-end services that are probably AI agents that will automate a series of tasks for you. You can program those yourselves, and then there's a thing called specs, which are the actual steps for building the application and more of the vibe coding, but it's kind of like guardrails built in so that you can't go wrong. And all you have to do is kind of like describe what you want to have happen, and the IDE will magically make this happen. Mitch, we've talked about vibe coding before, and we've kind of been a little bit dismissive of it as an enterprise tool, but I don't know, is something happening here?
Well, the big thing that's happening, first, Kiro is IDEs, CLIs are cool now, right? Everybody's coming out one, or they're acquiring one, or doing something around that, because that's the environment that software was created in. That's where developers spend most of their time. It's kind of the kitchen of software development. And what's interesting is Kiro, announced by AWS, is actually based on the open source of Microsoft's Visual Studio Code, VS Code, which has got 73 to 75% market share among developers. It is widely used. Even people that like Apple still develop on VS Code. So they've taken that open source, and what they've done is not just added another, I can generate code with whatever LLM model that you like to use. They've stepped back and said, well, yeah, we can do that, but let's really talk about what the developer's work is. So they've emphasized what they call Kiro specs, which is the upfront developing stories, turning those into requirements, turning that into design, that whole flow before you really start writing code, and laying out those plans, and then proving that with the developer, and then going to the coding phase and moving beyond. And of course, what you talked about, hooking into AI along the way to build and also to operate your code. So I think it's more of a holistic approach to IDEs than just a nice editor sitting alongside of a great natural interface to kind of guide your whatever you're asking the agent or the AI to do, LLMs to do on the back end. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this. There was an announcement actually just the other day by Perforce, who came out with Perfecto AI, which is a testing tool that instead of just generating tests, it actually monitors the requirements, the PDFs or the PRDs that you put together for a product, whatever you use to guide your requirements, or stories from Agile, and actually generates tests from that and analyzing code as code changes. So it's dynamically creating tests, not just here, create a bunch of tests for my code today. It's looking more holistically at the development process. That's the key trend to really get the productivity out of AI for software development.
Very good, Mitch. I got to tell you, people say, Shimmy, you have fun doing what you do. This whole vibe thing is exactly the kind of stuff why I enjoy doing what we do here, right? Let me just give a quick history of vibe coding on TechStrong Gang. I don't think it was more than 3-4 months ago. It was the first time maybe 6 months ago, we mentioned vibe coding. And Chris, I don't know if it was you or one of the other security experts said, nonsense, this stuff will never work. It's buggy, it's terrible, it's crappy code, it's low quality, it's a toy. About a month later, vibe coding's a nice little kind of hobby to do for a little home project. It's not terrible. A month later after that, a lot of people are vibe coding. There's some interesting stuff. It'll never work in the enterprise, mind you, but for little stuff, it's not so bad. Here we are, mark the date, July 15th. AWS comes out with an IDE for vibe coding for the enterprise. Is this the world we live in? Are we in a time zone? Chris, what do you say?
Well, that doesn't sound like something I would say, but if I did, I'll own that one, and it's wrong. I'm listening to Mitch, go through all that, and that sounds exactly right to me. And have the concerns I have for how AI is applied these days. That sounds like a logical structure. Now, I'd love to spend more time and pick it apart and see exactly how they're doing some of the LLM stuff. But so that what I'm finding as folks who are spending a lot of time around me the last couple of months are finding out that I'll use the word semantic an awful lot because AI doesn't describe at all what we're talking about here. I mean, any more than 700 other things, but they're semantic systems, and these are exactly the kind of use cases where you can understand that there's someone over here who has some characteristics and they're relating to something over here and building code. Mitch, as you're walking through that, I'm thinking through the steps and how that would be used. And again, I would bet that if I stared at it really hard, I would have a lot of criticisms, but it's in the right place, right? I haven't done a lot of coding, and I have used every language ever, but I try to avoid it. In the last 3 months, because I have these semantic partners, I write or copy and paste and occasionally edit piles and piles and piles of code. So everything I hear about vibe matches my thoughts. It's not about can I put the commas in the right place? Is do I know why I'm doing what I'm doing? And that's the semantic string kind of thing that what we erroneously call AI is literally fantastically built for.
The term was actually coined in February, Alan, and it was an ex post by Andrej Karpathy, who was a co-founder of OpenAI. I think he was Tesla before that. And it was it's a kind of a nice little definition. Essentially, it's when you're vibing, you're like in the zone, right? And this is about being in the zone of creating software using AI. So you're leaning into AI, not writing code traditionally and kind of augmenting with some things that AI can do for you. It's like, let's maximize what you can do with AI and see what's possible. And that's what caught on about it, is it started to describe what developers and platform engineers and testers are starting to experience as they really lean into AI for their work. Is there's prompting, and then there's really vibing, where you're really using AI and some of the capacities in ways we haven't even thought of
I
yet.
see two use patterns around this vibe coding that just from my observations and my friends. There's the Chris Blask of the world, who I wouldn't necessarily consider a coder, a professional coder, who are vibing, right? They're vibing. And then there's real software developers, right? Real professional coders. They're also vibing, but I think they're vibing to be fair, and Chris, no disrespect to you, but they're vibing at another level.
Right.
Right?
As they
Well, it's
should.
an accelerant no matter where you are on the curve, right? Whether you're, kind of more of a beginner who knows enough to be dangerous or a true expert, it's shifting you up the curve in terms of what you're able to produce, right? I mean, that to me is the big observation here, is like writing code and software development, software engineering. It might be the ultimate AI use case.
Well, that's what you would think from all the press and airtime it gets. It certainly is, and.
Well, but I think, Alan, the people are also like that's flowing through, right? I mean, you've heard about like a 50% decrease in the number of DevOps people in AWS as they're rolling this stuff out, right? You've seen some of the layoffs across the tech industry. I do think that we are getting that productivity because of this, and I think it's real enough that it's actually being reflected.
Google paid, what was it? Was it $3.5 billion or 2.5 billion, 2.4 to license the windsurf. We just spoke about this yesterday. 2.4 billion to license the windsurf software, and they hired the CEO, like the brains of the operation, supposedly.
And they were in pretty good shape before that.
Yeah,
right?
no,
I mean,
but
that
well,
was,
Gemini, they clearly wanted to make Gemini a better AI coder. But let me give you the other shoe that dropped on this. Some other AI company, they haven't released the amount they paid for it, but they bought Windsurf yesterday, right? I forgive me, I don't remember the name of this other AI company.
Everybody's got a piece of windsurf. Like if you didn't buy windsurf in the last
you
week,
missed out, exactly. So, but we spoke about
There's cognition. Alan, it's cognition.
yes,
at the bottom.
right. So we spoke about yesterday. Well, boy, they left Windsurf for dead. They're picking the bones. Someone found those bones pretty tasty, and
Windsurf's pretty smart. There's some smart people.
I have a couple of questions for Mitch. So, does vibe coding mean like no code, low code tools or history? I mean, are we like moving on behind? Because it seems like this is the same use case that we used to use for low code, no code.
Yeah, I think AI is the new low code, no code. And it's interesting talking to people that have low code, no code tools today is they're in this bifurcated world of bringing in AI to start to do more of the work with citizens developers, but they also don't want to immediately cannibalize their current customer base have got things they've already built in the current tools. So I think that transition is happening. But I want to go back to what Dan said. I took the position about 3 months ago in one of our papers that the place to watch of what AI is doing is in the developer world. And not just because I like development and like developers and all that stuff, that's the tip of the spear. That's the landing dock on the shores to come into the country and go through immigration and be part of the development process. Developers love to innovate. They love to try new things. Not every one of them, but it's a very innovative crowd, very independent crowd, and they will find a use for it. And they'll find use cases you don't even anticipate. And if you follow what's happening in development and how that's changing not only coding, but the overall work of the coders. I mean, I talk to very experienced developers that tell me I'm more tired than ever when I go home today because I'm thinking about this stuff at a much different level. It's just not like I need to convert this from JavaScript to this. It's I'm working up here and they're getting so much more done. So it is informing, I think, the rest of the market, at least in the software world, of what testing can look like, of what platform engineering can look like, what ops can look like. And I think the vendors who are smart will look at their own development teams as well as other development organizations as leading indicators of what AI is changing and how we create software.
I think you're so smart to call it the tip of the spear, Mitch. I mean, it's the people building AI that are applying it to their own work, their own kind of workload. It really is kind of where all the experimentation and the leading edge is happening. The kind of the ultimate client zero story. And now that's why I think it's so interesting to watch the companies that are building AI, because I think they're going to resemble what all companies look like longer term. I think, the things you see happening and the changes, in terms of workforce composition that you see in the companies that are really leading on the curve of building AI, that's kind of where everybody else is going to end up eventually, in my opinion.
All right, here's my prediction, right? So we started out from concept in February and we're now at enterprise in July. All this stuff is a commodity by September. Nothing to see here.
And I think along with that, Mike, it totally equalizes people who are non-coders to the people who are big DevOps folks.
Well, that's that whole citizen developer thing. Chris, go ahead. I'm sorry, buddy.
No, that's okay. Yes, ignore person. So I'll give you an example of vibe coding, right? In the last couple months, I have written hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of shell scripts and Python scripts and so forth, because I said, I want to build a metabolic system. That's it. And step by step, my AI partner who knows how this stuff works, presents options, creates the code, I put it in, it run it works, doesn't work. Every single step that I know how to do myself faster. And I don't have the attention span. I've hacked everyone's code. I've written some myself, but as you say, I'm not a coder, right? That's a long, tedious job. Now I can surf in because, to your point, Kate, I know what I want. I know how it's done. I don't want to do the work. I don't have to. I guess to the term of this segment, I just know the vibe. I know what I want. And now I have a complex, we, Quietwire, have a complex system, mesh that is based on, existing technologies that is supporting semantic processes in a autonomous, human machine A to A, fashion in 2 months.
I love it. Hey, I want to close this segment out with this, though. No doubt that the lens has been focused, or in terms of the AI market, on how AI is taking over coding, or has the potential to really rule coding and software engineering. But as humans, and we're all humans, I think here, unless someone's a deepfake, what it's doing in software coding, it will do in other verticals, whether it's medicine or law or manufacturing or what have you. That's why we spend so much time talking about AI. It's not just that we're geeks and this is the world we live in. This is happening. This is gonna send ripples and waves and tsunamis across every piece of it, and you can't lose sight of that when we talk. I've already spoken to some on my wife's family, to tell you the truth. They're not tech people, and they're like, yeah, this AI, it's a tech thing. They don't see it coming. As Bobby Bacala said to Tony Soprano, do you think you even hear it when it comes? You should be hearing it right now. You're watching TechStrong Gang.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Hey folks, we're back and we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're talking about some AI, but we're talking about cybersecurity and impersonation of government officials using deep fakes. And the latest victim apparently is Marco Rubio, but this has been going on for a little while now. So Chris, are we on the cusp of, outright anarchy? I mean, who's in charge? Nobody knows.
I am shocked to find gambling going on here. This is in 1990 at General Electric in South Carolina. I was there. We put a video conference centers. We had a demo tape. It was the world's leading graphics animation, and it had like real fluid T-Rex running around with silver skin, but moving realistically was amazing. And sitting there in 1990, and talking to my colleague, saying at some point we're going to make it so you cannot tell the difference, can't be admissible in court. What do we do? Right? So it's not like this hasn't been a long time coming, and we're here now. Like we were talking about in the break about AI. Yeah, if never, okay, but if eventually, this isn't eventually we will have these capabilities to protect the out now. What does that even mean? Well, it means we're going to have these sort of conversations where we say, did anybody think about how do we know who's who on the internet? We skipped that part. You don't. And to get my favorite topic, we're making all these things with AIs that have no common ethical framework and will do anything anybody feels like, prodding them into. So yeah, this is where we are.
And I personally, along this,
No, go ahead, Kate.
I think disinformation is tearing our nation apart. It is horrible what we see happening, and we don't have any real security mitigating controls at present. And
since I just acknowledged the problem, let me take a stab at the solution. I think there is solutions, and we saw this coming from miles away. There are all sorts of structures out there, including attestation systems and whatnot, that are exercised to reasonable depths. And again, all my biases being acknowledged. Civic AI that actually has a common shared reference boundary that attests to things it does. Like a human. And again, On the AI side, it's just like this. Will we never, ever, ever get to the point where they are, quote unquote, the same as us or smart as us? And if so, what do we need to do with it? If not, then forget it. If so, then we had to, in advance, think about how do we manage that? And I think the answer is ethics, right? AIs right now will do whatever. There's no tracing. There's no tracking. Civic AIs, that are following the canon that we published, we and now others are working on out there. They will not do things because it's unethical, and they will write it down if you ask them.
Man, I would give $10K to be able to do a Mission Impossible, tear off my mask right now, and I'm someone else under here. Because here's the issue with this. Let's not make AI the whipping boy for deepfakes, right? Deepfakes have been going on since before AI. And AI makes it easier. AI makes these deepfakes better. But deepfakes, have been going on. I have a confession. When I first started getting involved in computers, the first thing I was playing with were graphics programs. And, I would love switching people's heads onto other bodies and doing stupid things. I was young and stupid. Now I'm just old, still not so smart sometimes. But, deep fakes is a long time. As you say, Chris, this is not new stuff. It's just easier to do now. Kate, to your point, it's not just deep fakes that's tearing the fat. It's the whole misinformation, fake news, conspiracy theories. Everybody goes into their own echo chambers and all that stuff. Again, let's not blame AI for that, right? AI has enough problems, right?
I agree. Yes. Go ahead, Mike.
Just to be clear, Alan was switching heads on action figures like 50 years ago,
Yeah,
even before
remember?
computers.
G.I. Joes. One guy had the beard, one guy didn't. But anyway,
Well, the Rubio thing isn't that remarkable to me. I think what's a more important one is it's been less than 2 months ago. I think it was in June when the company was ARUP, I believe, Hong Kong-based firm, where somebody got a phishing email. And that led to a conference call with the deepfake.
That was in Singapore, I believe, wasn't it?
Was it Singapore? Yeah. Okay, I think it was Hong Kong, whichever. But they transferred $25 million, I think it was, and only to figure out, oops, that was not our CFO. So that's one example. You think that's the only example? That's where the real kind of, yes, it's deepfake and false information in society, and that's its own set of problems. But the money behind this and how much money will be stolen or already is being stolen because you can do this is scary.
So how will I know whether or not Dan O'Brien on this call is a deep fake? Do I have to have 2 machine services validate who he is, plus somebody who actually knows him to verify to me that that's actually Dan, or it's not going to play?
I'm going to take a page from Kate. I think where you're going with this, and I think I've said this on the show. My favorite little artifact right now is 7 years ago, I told a nation of 25 million years that in people that in 7 years, they would have to have an answer to this question or their lights will turn because people like me will tell them to turn off. Hey, why not? So it is and it isn't. This has been a long time coming, but it's woven in with everything else. How do we verify that the person telling you to turn off the power to a major city is the person telling you and they're authorized? Answer is not well. And folks like me and people with, interesting motivations can get around those, should they choose to. Now, again, this is inevitably a question. Will it always, I tell you, among security people, I love arguing with my friends about this one. It'll never be better. It'll always be. Really? Things never change. It's always going to be exactly this bad. No, I think it can get a lot better. I think it's always been sloppy. We've gotten away with it forever. We're being forced into ways to fix it, and we have the ways to fix it. So it's everything from a video to a social media post or whatnot. We'll get the visibility into provenance and so forth to the point that we can function.
But we have fixed similar issues with security. When you look at the whole, digital certificates like the DigiCert business, right? And that kind of thing. And we even have post-quantum algorithms for these certificates. We've been able to solve, is that information real? with digital certificate technology. Now, that doesn't mean that someone doesn't get a phishing mail saying, hey, I got your updated wire information, and you say, oh my goodness, that's the wrong wire information. Let me correct it for you. Right? That's human error. And it's the same thing here with deepfakes. We could have certificates and digital watermarks and all of these things for our own protection. But it's still the person behind the keyboard, especially when we talk about electronic stuff. It's the human error that we need to correct. Don't blame the technology.
Defenders, tend to feel, you're looking from the wrong side. You got to think about this from the attacker perspective. It's hard to imagine it being easier to successfully pull these sort of narrative attacks now. It's unlikely that it will stay exactly as easy. In fact, I think small changes make the world of the narrative attackers much harder.
People
and I think that
process technology.
Amen. Absolutely. I think at the end of the day that it can get better, but we are, as the article points out, woefully unprepared for this, alarmingly so.
Yeah, I mean, we really are getting to the point where we all almost need a zero trust mindset when it comes to consuming any information, right? Like it all needs to be authenticated. It all needs to be verified. I mean, I think a lot of the problem we talk about, when it comes to more of the disinformation things where Kate was talking about earlier is, the media landscape has moved from one that's been fairly highly centralized to massively distributed, right? And we've got to, get back, particularly when it comes to, government officials and the messages that they're communicating out to the public. We've got to have those trusted channels that they're flowing through, right? Like, seeing it on an X post or, seeing it on a web, a web video. That's probably not enough. We need to be able to have places we can go where, we know what we consume through that channel is going to be real and going to be verified. But
yeah, no, well enough, right? Because it's easy to get this, feel despair when you look at increasing volumes of, how am I going to process all of? And if the answer is you'll never be able to, then it's either we'll never be able to fix it or there's something else. And I think we look back, not as far back as you think, at how human culture has maintained, enough shared narrative to get through the day. It's small bits of attested information that everybody can agree on. That's a rock, and we all agree that rock's been there for the last 2 weeks. And that's the sort of capability that we have to today, and is beginning to happen today. Provide enough narrative reference points that most of the time we'll have the same results as we do in life, which isn't perfect, but it's enough.
So, Chris, I think you just said we're all going to agree that something's an actual fact, when in reality, we can't even do that.
Yes, we can. Yeah, you'd be surprised. You really would be surprised. The sky is blue on sunny days, right? There's enough things we agree on. It doesn't have to be much. It's not about out shouting. Think about it. Large numbers of people going down the street. You put one little thing on the street, the entire flow of people changes around it. It's not about convincing everybody anything.
Dad?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think we deal with deep fakes the way we deal with fakes of everything else, right? I mean, look at the $100 bill now. How do we make sure that the 100 that we, have in our wallet is real, right? You can mark it with the little pen. You've got the hologram. You've got all these things, right? I think we're just going to need to approach digital assets the same way we approach fakes with physical assets, whether it be a $100 bill, a concert ticket, a high-end luxury item like a high-end watch or piece of clothing or furniture. We're going to need to find ways to validate that things are what they say they are.
Glad you said that, because it comes down to something physical, right? Something you have. You recognize this, Chris, right? Something you know, something you have. When it comes to a person, anything can be faked, right? I can fake your Social Security. Once I have your Social Security number, to go do bad things with it. I can fake you with your voice or with your image. But today we rely on, I think increasingly, it's got to be something physically that we have. If I'm sitting on a conference call and I have a device that I'm holding that is my device and verified that it's mine, and electronically and can verify that that device is present during my conversation with you, or it's watermarked in my digital image or whatever it might be. The physical part of this, to your point, Dan, the dollar bill, whether it's the strips we're inserting into it or the holographs, there is a physical component to security to be able to validate human identity and who we
So
are.
are we going to have to do two-factor every time I do a Zoom with you, Mitch?
No. I'll disagree with you, Mitch, on this one, because the difference is not something you have, it's something you are. And that doesn't mean biometrics. And, it's like, and we're pushing time here, but yeah, that's something
I
you
agree
are,
with that.
you can't be taken away from you. And you're, where you are, your
I agree with
semantic
that.
environment, right? Yeah.
So
You're right.
let me wrap this up for us. My con law teacher in law school 100 years ago taught us something, and it's proven true. Society runs 3 to 5 years behind technology, right? And this AI deepfake stuff, and by the way, I'll point out on the ticker, Taylor, it's Secretary Rubio, not Senator. He's the Secretary of State. It's going to take us 3 to 5 years to catch up with what the bad guys are able to do right now with AI. And not just bad guys, with whatever's going on with AI. Society has a lot of inertia built in. It doesn't slalom, a ski course. It takes big obtuse turns. And so we could rail on here all we want. But it's going to take but in 5 years, we will come up with, whether it's biometrics or something, or to Chris's, your point, we'll come up with something. We'll mitigate it. It's just going to take time. This stuff is happening so quick, right? Maybe someone will come up with a vibe to fix deepfakes. I don't know. Anyway, gang, what a great discussion today. We live in interesting times, that's for sure. Thank you for watching. We hope you've enjoyed today's TechStrong Gang. As usual, we have a full TechStrong TV lineup immediately following, so stay tuned for that. Of course, you can always check this out on TechStrong.tv, on the TechStrong TV OTT app, or our TechStrong TV YouTube channel. By the way, we now have the individual segments broken out on the YouTube channel, so you don't have to watch all 3 segments. If there's a particular segment you like, go check it out on YouTube. Until tomorrow, though, everyone, this is Alan Schimmel. We're out of here. Thank you.